Hi, hello, and welcome, or welcome back, I suppose. Today we're kicking off our little romantic sojourn in the lead up to Valentine's. Now, we're not starting with a romance novel per se, but it is still a central part of what we're looking at, that being Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. Spoilers ahead, and just as a heads up, we will be talking about topics of sexual assault. This book, set in the 60s, follows Elizabeth Zott. She spent her life not following the expectations set on her as a woman, eventually becoming a chemist. She has a brilliant mind and would be able to pursue her theories further if not for the fact that she's the only woman in her institute who actually works in the labs and isn't, say, a secretary. There she meets Calvin Evans, an equally brilliant mind, and the two of them fall hard and fast. He wants to be able to elevate her in her career, but she doesn't want to be seen as having slept her way to the top. Later down the line, Calvin passes in quite a nasty accident, leaving Elizabeth with their dog, and though they never married, he's also left her pregnant. Bear in mind that this is a time where a child born out of wedlock is still a major issue for people. People, including her, as her pregnancy results in her firing from the lab. And while she does return there later on, she ends up leaving again because they take all the hard work she did and slapped the men's names on the papers. Eventually, she ends up in a meeting with another parent from her daughter's school who happens to be a TV exec. And one thing leads to another, and Elizabeth becomes the host of Supper at 6. It becomes a runaway success, with her using her scientific knowledge hand in hand with the cooking, and it becomes a platform that allows women to go, I'm not just a housewife, and I can also have aspirations outside of this. I have kind of mixed feelings about this book, and a lot of it is about the execution of what is clearly a brilliant setup. I love what it's trying to do on the whole, but I often struggle to really get into it. I do want to start off, however, by saying the way Garmus tackles Zott's sexual assault and harassment is handled rather well. It's a little graphic, but that's the nature of the topic. The instances themselves are told in a matter-of-fact way, and there are instances of catharsis that allow for a moment to breathe. Zott wanted to do a PhD, but couldn't because her professor raped her, and the police wouldn't take her seriously. Our catharsis comes from the fact that she gets away from him by stabbing her with a number 2 pencil. Later, when the top man at the network tries to intimidate her by sexually harassing her, she reaches into the bag that she knows has a massive knife inside. Given that his intimidation tactic was getting his knob out, the knife scared the shit out of him enough to give him a heart attack, and couldn't have happened to a better guy. It is the heaviest topic of the book, but I wanted to start with saying that Garmus did a good job, as far as I can see, with handling it. Now, let's get on to why I have decidedly mixed feelings about this book. Well, to start off, the first 2/3 drag like hell and feel meandering and kind of without any planning. It just sort of feels like stuff happening. And sure, all books can be boiled down to stuff happening, but usually there's a good flow to these things that means it doesn't feel like that. And I do think a huge part of that stilted feeling comes from the fact that some of the characters, especially Elizabeth, feel like characters in a book rather than anything true to life. I can often see what Garmus is aiming for, but I kept finding that she was missing the mark. Elizabeth only uses chemical terms for things, like always saying sodium chloride instead of salt. And I found it deeply irritating. I get it. I'm someone who brings my own interest into any given conversation and refers to them as a base point, but I also understand that most people don't really care. And I believe a lot of this seems to be that Garmus was trying to write autistic characters with Calvin, Elizabeth, and their daughter, Mad. The portrayals with Calvin and Mad are actually alright, but I did just have issues with the way it's shown with Elizabeth. Like, for me, with her, it's a case of I know that she would have been socialized as a woman to be more masked. Like, this happens to this day. Women and girls are raised to be more sort of presentable, as it were. They're meant to be quote unquote proper. And that isn't to say that autism still doesn't present itself even when women are masking, but I do wish we'd explored that better here. Calvin wouldn't have had masking expectations in quite the same way, given he is a man and he's a savant in his field. And with Mad, she's being raised by a woman who's set out to defy gender expectations. Don't get me wrong, the particular kind of headstrong that Elizabeth is exactly in line with what I would expect for a neurodivergent person, especially a woman, but there's something in the fact that she does not know how to abide by expectations in the right scenario that I don't find believable. Women have such strict social pressures, more so in the time that she would have been raised, so she would have figured out how to put somewhat of a mask on. That's not to say she should have to, but there are moments where it would have been better to make a distinction where, she's defiant on purpose, refusing the mask, and where she's simply unaware of a social rule or cue. However, I will say that the presentation of autism with Mad felt so real to me. It not only felt like that very particular way that autistic children have the usual childlike bluntness turned up to 11, but it's the way that when she's right about something, she's right, and she simply can't understand why she shouldn't be correcting somebody else if they're even a little bit wrong. She's constantly in trouble at school thanks to her being miles ahead of her classmates and that correction of her teachers, and looking at everything very scientifically. To me, the portrayal of it with Elizabeth felt a lot more like looking at a character in a book, whereas with Mad, there was a lot more of a sense of realism with it. And with Calvin, the biggest thing with him is his insistence on the fact that Elizabeth will also love rowing. That's his biggest love outside work, and because that's his favourite thing, then why wouldn't it also be hers as well? There's more to it than that, but that kind of typifies the way that it shows with him, with stubbornness and insistence. Also, I should be clear here, the word autism isn't ever actually used, but if you have even the most basic comprehension skills, you can see that this is what Garmus is going for with these characters. And given that we've just mentioned him there, let's go on to talk about Calvin and Elizabeth's relationship. This is, after all, meant to be our lead up into my romantic reads, so it's certainly worth talking about, because like most things in this book, I don't fully know how I feel about it. On some levels, their relationship didn't actually seem that great. They kept things from each other, they never really tried to understand one another, and each of them kept being incredibly stubborn, feeling like they were often just at odds with one another. And yet, I can't help but feel like they were in fact a great match for one another. I think there's something about the fact that they both have the right idea but often struggle to get their brainwaves across to one another. Like, the way they finally go on a date is very sweet, although it's incredibly awkward. It feels just like they're both almost there and they just can't quite. But they also bicker so much. And it's like they both know what they want, and because they're so stubborn, they can't really accept that the other one might be right, and it just left me feeling irritated with them both. Maybe that's why I left the book thinking they were right for each other, because they're like both low-key irritating in exactly the same way, so it's just like, well, you know what, keep each other. But the issue with that is that when Calvin died, I didn't really get hit in the emotions. Shouldn't say getting hit, the poor choice of words, but it does lead me on to my next point, which is the chapter where he does die, which is really quite graphic, by the way, a lot more graphic than I was expecting. But the chapter where he dies ends with their dog 630 running off to, and I quote, give Elizabeth the bad news. Can someone explain to me why this fucking dog is personified so damn much in this book? Him being able to understand words, fine, I guess. Him being emotionally intelligent, absolutely understandable. Him acting like an actual person to the point where it gave me vibes that he's like a low-key version of the Cat in the Hat, absolutely the fuck not. Like, up to that line about him giving Elizabeth the news, I'd spotted it, the personification of him, a couple times, but I didn't really make a note of it. But that line pissed me off so bad, and then it just didn't stop. Like, I recently read Keeper of Stories, right? And there's a dog in there that's sort of humanized as well. And the difference there is that all comes from what the main character in the book imagines the dog would be saying. It's presented here as if this dog has a human brain, like it's fucking Air Bud or something. Like it can communicate with everybody around it. And yes, many dogs have incredible emotional intelligence, but that isn't what this is. This is such a weird feature of an otherwise incredibly grounded book, and it annoyed me so bad. If this weren't a part of the book, I would still have mixed feelings overall, but I think I would be more swayed towards the positive. There's a whole chapter following the dog, and I think I'm meant to find the whole thing heartwarming and endearing, and oh, poor dog. This book was not the place for that kind of fucking writing. Like, back to the whole thing of him giving the news of Calvin's death to Elizabeth. No, he fucking didn't, did he? Just because he can understand a whole bunch of words, and I'll suspend my disbelief there, does not mean that he could be like, oh man, I have some terrible news. Give me a break. God, I wish I could fully express how this pissed me off so bad, but I think that would have to be a whole video on its own. And it's also, there are only so many ways of me just going, it's tonally entirely not, oh, it doesn't work. It doesn't work whatsoever. Like, it felt like she put like a fun, feel-good children's book about a dog scattered throughout this novel, which is very much not a feel-good children's book at all. But to round off, I'm going to talk about the ending of the book, because it seems fitting. Let's end at the end. Now, it doesn't actually end badly at all, but for me, I feel like it should have ended about 20 or so pages before the actual end point. There is this beautifully emotional moment where she gives her on-air goodbye speech on her final episode of Supper at 6. It felt like the natural end point, and with what we'd been given before that, we could safely assume that she was going to, in some way, make her way back to the scientific field. Now, the ending we get still works fine, but to me it felt a little bit too much like we were wrapping things up nicely in a bow and giving everyone a nice it all works out in the end type thing. And I'm not against it. It didn't feel too egregious, and the characters did generally feel like they deserved what they got in the end, but to me it was just a bit like Garmus realised she still had a couple of loose threads that needed stitching in, and she just went, oh, we'll just deal with it at the end, and it's sorted, it's fine. Like, I do think that even in getting all my feelings down here, I'm just left not really knowing how I feel about this book, because it isn't bad, and in areas it's even great, but I just couldn't ever fully get on board with it. I will say though, the hardcover under the dust jacket, it's very pretty. I like when the hardcover gets a good look. Nope. I like when the hardcover also has like a nice look to it, not just the dust jacket. Too many hardcover books, it's just black book, gold text on the spine. Like, come on, jazz it up a bit. And this book does. Next week, we will be looking at The Gods of Love by Nicola Mostyn as we continue on our little romance sojourn. Do let me know what you thought about this book if you've read it, because I know it has amazing reviews, so I'd be curious to know how your thoughts may differ or agree. Also, if you've watched the TV adaptation of it, let me know how it stands up as a show on its own, how it stands up as an adaptation of it. To keep up with what I'm doing, feel free to like, feel free to subscribe, and feel free to ring that notification bell, all the cringe shit I'm supposed to ask you to do in my videos. But most importantly, I hope you have a wonderful day, a wonderful night, a wonderful whenever you are watching this. Take good care of yourself. Right.